The third aspect, now here we see the difference between understanding and analyzing the emotions. Okay, employing emotional knowledge. What they are talking about and how this is different from perceiving the emotions is the ability to label the emotions, to name the emotions, recognize relations amongst the words and the emotions themselves, such as the relation between liking and loving, right? This is a very Western concept as it might seem like, but actually in the West, for a very long time in the relationships, they keep telling each other that I like you. Calling out and saying that I love you is a very, very far-fetched thing and it happens very late in the relationships out there. So which is where this concept, and it's not very different from how we as well look into our relationships out here in the Eastern world or Indian world. It's not very different, but just for the fact that the labeling of emotions might be very different or calling it out might be very different. We are very conscious, and here we are even more conscious of the stronger words to the emotions to be brought to the table. We are relatively more mild. So essentially, the label of emotions and recognizing the labels or the relationship between those labels is a very important aspect. So that, and which is what Professor Tripathi was talking about, this whole vocabulary out of aspect of feel emotions. Very often, this whole aspect of just feeling bad and sad and not so good, etc., is just a very surface level expression of the emotions. It's just about getting a little more granular and deeper. That helps the other person to, and when I was talking about wanted emotion or wanted affection, it's just about expressing in more candid and more specific terms when we are experiencing any kind of emotions, so that there's a, aid to the communication. There's a facilitation to the communication that we have with each other, and that's a very critical aspect of emotional intelligence. How do we communicate the emotions in the right fashion, in the right name, in the right label, right? So that's the aspect. The second aspect they're talking about is the ability to interpret the meaning that emotions convey regarding relationships, such as the sadness often accompanies a loss. Okay, so what is the underlying? So if there is sadness, what is causing that sadness? So and that might be not necessarily loss at times. So I might be sad for a different reason. It might not necessarily be on account of loss. So it's about interpreting the meaning of emotion and looking at what is the underlying cause of that emotion and what is triggering that emotion in me. I might be lonely, I might be alone, but that might be a different emotion completely. And if I'm lonely and sadness is triggered out of that, it doesn't mean necessarily a loss out there. So it's about interpreting the meaning that the emotions convey. So I think that's a very critical next step analysis. So if you look at again the shades of analysis, first is the label, second is interpret, right? The third is ability to understand the complex feelings, simultaneous feelings of love and hate. And correct me if I'm wrong, in most relationships, you hate the person most who you love the most. Otherwise, why do you hate the person? Right? As or blends such as awe as a combination of fear and surprise. So I might be experiencing awe on account of either fear or surprise. I could be shocked or I could be surprised. Right? So it's about understanding these complexities, and making those distinctions, and where very often there are likelihood that the two sides of the experience or two sides of emotions we might be experiencing more or less in the same relationship at the same time at times, right? You might be offsetting a situation of hate in the moment because you had a fight with your spouse in that moment, but then you try to offset it by the state of love. So which is where it's about finding these complex relationships or understanding these complex feelings that we get. And feelings are not, they don't operate in isolation that I experience only A at certain time and B at the other time. So how do we kind of see these interrelationships, right? So that's the important aspect. And the fourth aspect again over here is the ability to recognize likely transitions among emotions, such as the transition from anger to satisfaction or from anger to shame. Now, these are the triggers that get caused. A continued anger can cause, once it has been met or once there's something changed outside in the situation, I might be feeling satisfied. Or as an outcome, as a continued anger, I mean, I shouted at somebody, and at a later state, I feel ashamed of it, that why should I have done that, right? Or could I have responded in that situation somewhat differently? As an afterthought, as a reflection, I experience these different outcomes of the emotions that might have happened. So recognize likely transitions among emotions. So I experience something and I experience something as a continuum to that. I shouted at somebody and I felt good about it because I needed to throw out anger. I shouted at somebody, another occasion, as I said, I would be feeling ashamed that why did I do that? That guy was so meager. That guy was not capable. So essentially, it also is triggered about our judgment of saying, did I shout on somebody because of his attitude? Or did I shout on somebody because of his or her incapability? Obviously, the second I would be triggering or reflection would cause me to think that I shouldn't have, because it's just beyond somebody's capacity. In the previous, if it has to do with attitude, I certainly think it was critical and I needed to, right? So with that as a perspective, so when you look at this, labeling the emotions, interpreting the emotions, finding the complex feelings or understanding the complex feelings, and then the transitions of emotions from one to another. That's another critical aspect that Meyer and Salovey Caruso have been talking about. And essentially, if you look at it in the three things that we have covered, from the first to the second to the third, from perception to emotion, facilitation for thinking or use of emotions, and the third is about analyzing or understanding the emotions, you see again shades of growth or development, as they call it, as 16 stage. Coming to the final part of it, which is about regulating the emotions, right? Reflective regulation of emotions. What they essentially are talking about over here is about intellectual growth with the leverage of emotions over here. Ability to stay open to feelings, both those that are pleasant and those that are unpleasant. How do we kind of create in ourselves that capacity that in the same day, on different days, on different occasions, I might be, or in the same occasion, in different moments, I might be experiencing both the positive and the not so positive emotions. How do I stay open to it? How do we be with the moment? How do I be patient with it? The second aspect they are talking about is ability to reflectively engage or detach for an emotion depending upon its judged informativeness or utility, right? So it's about how do I, and what it talks about, we had already touched briefly yesterday, is this whole aspect of optimal detachment, right? How do I ensure so that emotion doesn't ride upon me and that I make use or leverage the emotion? And which is where in certain moments where the emotion might be getting triggered, I might hold back. I might step back, and I might take a step backwards simply to be able to reflect. A lot of times, a lot of people, and particularly coming from the yoga and all kinds of meditation, etc., they talk about, or even the Western experts, they say, in the moment of anger, count 10, right? Very often they ask about counting 10. What is that counting 10? Essentially, what they are saying is this aspect of saying, get back, step back, take a breath, take a deep breath. And that's essentially what it is about. So that you can give yourself some time to reflect, to think, to analyze, do all of those stuff that we have seen till now, those 12 items or 13 items in those short durations. How do you give yourself that short moment of 10 seconds to be able to very quickly calibrate before you can see and judge the informativeness or the utility of an emotion in that moment, right? And not go beyond or not go out of the control over there. The third aspect they are talking about is the ability to reflectively monitor emotions in relation to oneself and others, such as recognizing how clear, typical, influential, and reasonable they are. It's about over the period of time. Am I being realistic with my demands, whether at work or at personal space, the manner in which I respond? So how do I kind of keep monitoring and looking at what is the kind of pattern of my behavior? What is the kind of pattern of behavior that I'm crafting to myself? Hello? So what is the pattern of behavior that I'm creating to yourself? And mind you, when they talk about monitoring the emotions and being reflective about it, what they certainly are saying is that we reinforce our behaviors, we reinforce our emotions, we reinforce our responses in a certain pattern. So that is where to get reflective about it, and by monitoring it in terms of saying, is it transitioning, is it aiding, is it moving in the right direction, right? Are they clear, typical, influential? Am I wearing that halo, right? I mean, halo is aiding, being restricted. I think somebody's hello, excuse me. Thank you. And the fourth aspect and the final aspect that they talk about over here is ability to manage emotions in oneself and others by moderating negative emotions and enhancing pleasant ones without repressing and exaggerating information they may convey. Towards the end of it, it's about managing emotions in oneself and in others. So it's about, gaining that efficiency, gaining that comfort, gaining that competence to be able to, or that ability as they talk about it, to be able to coach emotions in self or coach emotions in others, right? So essentially the model, as I talked about, it's an ability model as it has been termed. They themselves called it out. But if you look at, these are essentially some of the abilities that we already possess. All of us have it to some level or the other. But this becomes a little bit of that charter, a little bit of that prescription in terms of saying, and for us to kind of take mark and say, which is the one that I'm doing well and which is the one that I need to do differently or need to improve. And which is where I thought it's so important to spend a little bit of a time on this framework, because that is enabler in most situations, if you really go as a guide for us to be able to refer back to in terms of saying what I do better and what are the topics that I need to pick up out of this to be able to do better on. Right? So that's the aspect, or that's the framework that they spoke about. Based on this, over the period of research that they have continued to conduct, and sometime in 2002, they came up with this tool, which Maya Salovey-Caruso, Emotional Intelligence Test, as they call it, MSCEIT. It's an easily available tool from an organization called Multi Health Systems Incorporated, which is in America. This is a tool which is completely online, to be taken by the people who are above 17 years of age. So you need to have certain set of experience behind you to be able to respond to these questions, and which is where it has been assumed that people at 17 years plus, they have fair level of experience with regards to emotion to be able to make these kind of analysis and judgments about themselves. This consists of 141 items. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes to complete it, and it's a very robust standardized tool. Provides 15 main scores, a total EI, and plus 2 area scores, and 4 branch scores, and 8 task scores. So these are the different kinds of scores that you draw out of this questionnaire. In addition, there are a few supplemental scores as well that emerge, which essentially they draw in terms of supplemental scores when they say how, what's the orientation to make a positive or a negative impression that I might have, etc., etc. So those kind of supplemental scores also emerge out of this tool. So that's a tool. It's a standardized, it's a well-developed, it's a good enough tool for most purposes that we think, both in the organizations and for the academic purposes. As I said, it's been fairly standardized, and hence it's and being standardized. When I say it's been validated and established for its reliability fairly well. And it's a sound tool to be put to use. They have been refining it. 2002 is the first version that they created of it, and they have been refining that thereafter as well. And these tools are still the tool is still available. So that's one of the models that we saw, which came from Meyer, Salovey, and Caruso. Briefly, Nina ji had also talked about it yesterday. I thought it was important that we go into the depth of it and try and see what this talks about, particularly in terms of perceiving the emotions, using the emotions, understanding the emotions, and managing the emotions, right? So that is one of the frameworks. Now let me move to the next one. This is one of the most widely used framework in a way. It has been referred to by Daniel Goleman himself as generic competency model, where he talks about emotional intelligence is a competence for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating oneself, for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. We all know it talks about 5 aspects: knowing one's emotions, which is self-awareness; managing emotions, which is self-regulation, right? Motivating oneself is self-motivation; recognizing emotions in others is social awareness; and handling emotions, which is the social skills. So essentially 3 aspects which are to do with self and 2 aspects which are to do with social or the environment or the people around us. So that's something that we have been talking about. Essentially, at the outset, I would like to say the tool that you have experienced is an abridged and early version created by Daniel himself quite some time back. And it's non-academic or not standardized tool such to that extent because it doesn't have the negative response pattern. It doesn't provide. So it's a tool which is good for such kind of a purposes as we make use as part of the classroom, which you would experience in the next 2 sessions. But it comes from Daniel Goleman and rests on this specific framework that we are going to look at going from here forward. Okay. So as part of this framework, going one by one, knowing one's emotions, which is the self-awareness aspect, Daniel talked about 3 aspects over here. That is emotional awareness. Just as Myron Salovey was talking about, the emotional awareness over here is just about recognizing what is that emotion trigger in me. Which is that emotion, right? And which is that emotion at the moment that I'm experiencing? Am I sad? Am I happy? Right. So that's the emotional awareness, that consciousness about what emotion that is in me at the moment. The second aspect he talks about is the accurate self-assessment. So once I know what is my emotion, it's about accurate assessment of 2 aspects that he talks about. What is triggering that emotion and what is my response or the manner in which I'm responding to that emotion? What is my response pattern, right? So the 2 aspects of accurate self-assessment that he talks about in his postulation is, as I said, what is causing that emotion in me and what is the pattern or the manner in which I'm responding with that emotion that's triggered in me. And third aspect that he says, and that's why it's been called as competency model, because he has tried to make it a little more generic and overarching competency model. And then he talks about, particularly once you have made this emotional awareness is there, once you have made an appropriate assessment of your emotion, it's about feeling a little more confident to deal with that. And which is where he talks about this whole aspect of self-confidence. So once you know it better, you are better ready, you're better equipped to be able to deal with greater confidence the emotions, right? So that's the self-awareness aspect that he talks about. Then he comes to the second aspect, which is self-regulation, right? And the self-regulation, essentially, he talks about the self-control. So once I'm confident, I don't feel so vulnerable, and I'm better equipped to be able to control my emotions, right? I can, and when he's talking about control, it's just about those 10 seconds. It's just about those, any of other, experts might have been talking about. It's that moment of, holding back and not throwing out the emotion or spewing the emotion just as it emerges in us. The next aspect is the trustworthiness. This is again going back to the vocabulary part of it, that am I genuine? Am I authentic with my emotion? In the display of that emotion, in the vocabulary or in the presentation of that emotion, right? So that creates trustworthiness, and that's a very critical aspect. The third aspect is conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is the aspect of being, mindful to the fact as to how am I supposed to be behaving versus how I think instantaneously or intuitively I'm likely to be behaving. So being conscientious with regards to what is emerging in you and how it is supposed to be demonstrated outside. The third aspect of self-regulation, fourth aspect of self-regulation that he talks about is the aspect of adaptability. How quick am I able to adapt? In the moment when I'm being beaten down, when my boss has shouted at me, do I come across onto the well, into the forum, and I demonstrate that emotion, or can I quickly adapt? Can I migrate from an emotional state to the other emotional state? How quickly and how effectively and how efficiently can I do that? So that's the aspect of adaptability. And the fifth aspect that he talked about is the aspect of then innovativeness. So if we have done these 6 or 7 odd things he talks about, that triggers. Again, it's the aspect of when I'm better positioned or better in sync with my emotion and the capacity to understand and to regulate my emotions, that triggers a positive innovation or creativeness in oneself. So which is where this whole innovativeness and innovativeness with regards to the other things, innovativeness with regards to the emotions themselves. Can I play with it? Some of you, we would have seen the Hogan assessment. It talks about something in the Hogan Development Survey. There's a tool which has been developed, very prominently used by most organizations today, which is called Hogan Development Survey. And in that, there is one of the aspects they call about being colorful, right? So it's about how do I play around with the emotions after a while? How do I, when I say play around, don't get me wrong, it's not being manipulative. It's about, as we were talking about yesterday, saying the things. I was talking about Peter Kibok's experience, that he said the same thing, but with a positive body language. So how do you create your methods? There's a very interesting work with a gentleman or the researcher called Eric Fromm, who made an analysis. It's a thin analysis, very rare to find, on Gandhi, on Mahatma Gandhi. And he talked about, and he did an analysis of how innovative was Gandhi with his leadership style. He talked about, and then a very, inadvertent question that comes or gets triggered over there. It says, who throws those tantrums of saying, I won't eat food? Perhaps most of us know very small kids do that. But Gandhi's satyagraha was nothing but about throwing those, kind of tantrums in those situations, saying, if you don't agree, you don't believe, you don't go with as I expect you to, I'm not going to eat food. So that's about the Gandhi's innovativeness of satyagraha, Gandhi's innovativeness of creating or crafting the leadership style that he created for himself, which we all know. If you get into the deeper appreciation of it, you see how many more moments that he would have created when you read the Experiment with Truth. How innovative was he with his style when it came to managing, regulating his emotions, right? So that's something which is there. So that's the aspect of self-regulation. Getting to the next part, self-motivation. Now, self-motivation is, so again, it's about saying, once you know these two things, when you have done these two things, then you come to the next one, which is self-motivation, which is, first of all, achievement drive. Am I sufficiently driven? Am I triggered to do something? If I don't have, I might be the most brilliant guy, but I'm an armchair thinker. So that achievement drive is very critical. He looks at it, as I said, again, I'm repeating, it's the competency model. So there might be things which are not necessarily to do with the emotions alone, right? But they do trigger emotions. So like achievement, right? That drive. So he talks about not achievement per se, not drive per se, but the achievement drive, right? So that trigger from inside. Then second aspect is the commitment. So if I have that achievement drive, if I set my target to something, then am I sufficiently committed, or am I going to leave or drop the ball early on in the face of odds? So how am I going to proceed on it? How committed I am going to be with regards to what I have targeted or what I have intended to kind of get to that. And the third is very critical. I think about things, I am committed to it, but do I have the initiative? Am I willing to make that first move? Am I willing to, stick my neck out to say that some things need to change over here? And when you do that, certainly you have to hold high with optimism. Yes, the odds are going to be high. we were listening to, and I think I really compliment Professor Rajiv Tripathi yesterday when he took his session, that comfort with this, to come up onto forum like this in front of 100 odd people and to say, this is not the topic that I'm going to be completely comfortable about. But yes, I'm optimistic that it's going to be in the right direction. Yes, it's his initiative that has created this kind of a forum, which has finally brought us here and that we are talking together, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So I think that's very important for anybody. If my self-motivation is not going to be there, I'm only going to make everybody sink down with me in the process, right? So that self-motivation is very critical. And then comes the social awareness part of it that he talks about. And social awareness is the aspect of. So till now, as we saw, it's more about self and managing self, understanding self, appreciating self, and creating trigger in ourselves. Now we move to the social side of it. And before that we move into the social space, it's very critical that that has to be resolved. I think it's a given that some of those things have to be first attained or addressed before we move to the social space, right? And which is where the social awareness comes into the play. He talks about, first and foremost, empathy. Empathy, the word, one of the most prominently, one of the most loosely used words very often, which is where the simplest definition given for empathy is getting into the other's shoes. But the fact is, a lot of times we are really not very clear when we are being empathetic or sympathetic or apathetic. These are very different. It's the same continuum, but somewhere in the middle. So empathy is to be able to aid somebody, help somebody without having the same clouded vision as somebody might be having in that moment. Right? So how do I get away and provide a very objective perspective to a situation with regards to somebody without getting sucked into that emotion myself, without getting affected with that emotion myself? Right? So that's the aspect of empathy that he talks about. The second is service orientation. And I think this is a crux of everything when you look at the fruitfulness or the effectiveness of relationship. Am I oriented to provide service? Am I oriented to support, to aid, to help, to facilitate? If I don't have that genuine intent, that feeling, the relationship erodes very quickly, which is the whole aspect of authenticity, the whole aspect of authentic leadership, if some of what you have read about, is this aspect of service orientation, which is very, very critical. At the highest levels in the organization, at the bottommost levels of the organization, you can make that very clear distinction very easily with regards to people who is high on that service orientation, who is not. People talk about sitting with the open doors and etc., etc. With that open door, you still find that nobody feels comfortable to walk into the room. The distinction or the differentiation straight away comes from here. If the person doesn't have that service orientation, as much you keep it as a door open, or you even take away the walls of the room, nobody is going to reach out. Right? So that trust, that comfort, that capacity comes from this empathy and service orientation. Right? And that orientation to develop trust, develop others. Am I willing, with that service orientation, am I intending, or I'm going to be secretive, I'm going to keep things to myself, I feel insecure. If I feel insecure, am I going to be developing others? Hence, it's a very critical awareness, social awareness, that am I, inclined, am I driven to develop others? The fourth aspect, and which is now in, this postulation might have happened 25 years back, but it has gained significant credence in today's world, particularly in the larger organizational space, is about leveraging diversity. Diversity of all kinds. Caste, color, creed, male, female, underprivileged, or, physically challenged. So in every kind of aspect, am I tuned in? I mean, there's lots of time you find this hypocritical perspective that people say, okay, fine, we have this whole orientation towards diversity. But a very simple thing that you find in the organization, and which is something that we need to get mindful about or conscious about, is have we created the infrastructure? suited to the diversity. And when I say this, and very often I recognize and I feel that in intention, in discussion, you find that most people would talk about leveraging diversity, but then when you walk into their offices, it's only the staircases, which means somebody who's going to be physically challenged would have a difficulty getting there. Or the washrooms are not, created in a manner which is going to be conducive. You won't believe there are organizations even today where there are not washrooms for ladies, even for that matter. So it's about leveraging diversity and getting really, so that's an inner intent. It's not, and if that intent is there, I think somebody is going to be walking the talk, somebody is going to be really mindful about it rather than just having a lip service to it. So that's about it. And the fifth aspect, which is not very comfortable to most people, for most people to recognize and talk about, is the aspect of political awareness. Now, what is this political awareness? Honestly, while in our appreciation, the word political has a negative connotation, if any of you would have gone to any of the Dexter's dictionary or Oxford or Cambridge or any of those dictionaries, political is not a bad word, right? So it's about that dynamics in the organization. When it's a people organization, any social organization, no organization, as Professor Tripathi was talking about, is a single person organization. If there are going to be two people, it's going to be a social organization. And if there are going to be a social organization, there's going to be some dynamics out there. So this capacity to be able to sense that dynamics and to be facilitating in the appropriate fashion, in the right direction, the whole dynamics is the aspect of political awareness that he talks about. So 5 critical aspects: empathy, service orientation, developing others, leveraging diversity, and political awareness. These are still completely the aspects, though it's about social awareness, it's again about oneself. Either I'm empathetic or not, either I have service orientation or not, either I have developing or orientation to develop others or not, either I have the orientation towards leveraging diversity or not, and am I politically savvy? Most people that you meet up in the organization, they say, everything is fine, but I can't deal with this politics in the organization, right? It's just about understanding that the dynamics is going to be there. As clean an organization might be, as dirty an organization might be, there's going to be some element of political dynamics. There's going to be some element of social dynamics into the organization, if we are a social organization. If you really go back to the open systems that Katz and Khan talk about, open systems theory, essentially particularly talks about this whole aspect of organization-led trophy, which is on account of the political dynamics or the social dynamics. If some of you would have read the open systems theory or the systems theory particularly. Right? So that's something which comes and is as aspect that Daniel Goleman talks about in terms of political awareness. Going to the next aspect, or the last aspect, which Daniel has particularly then talked about, is about the interplay or the capacity which then comes in that interplay or interpersonal relationships. It's the social skills. So I might have the drive, I might have the capacity, I might have the thinking, but can I influence? I might have the initiative, but can I influence? Can I make one person to be agreeable to what I intend to do? Or I'm going to be a lone ranger, as you call it in today's world, lone wolf. So that capacity to influence, that ability to influence, or that competence to influence others is a very critical aspect. The second aspect that he talks about, and here, before I move to the second aspect, I think, a couple of things which become very, very critical then is, there's a whole model which comes from Harvard, which essentially talks about 3 things. It talks about the capacity to make judgment, is the first aspect. The second aspect it talks about, and I'll be sharing at a later session, a little more in detail. The second aspect it talks about the drive. And the first and most critical aspect is this capacity to influence. So if I have the judgment, I have the drive, but I can't influence, it's of no good. If I have the capacity to influence, I have the drive, but I can't make a judgment, then I can maybe leverage somebody else's capacity to make judgment. And when I'm saying judgment, we'll talk about it, it's more cognitive judgment. But if I have the capacity to make judgment, I can as well influence, but I don't have the drive. I might be writing a book, nothing bad about it, but might be using indirect methods to influence. But am I sufficiently driven to do things and make things happen? So that's the influence, right? So influence is very critical. Communication. As we all know, there's lots of work which has happened on language by Chomsky and others. The communication is something which is completely the onus of the sender. I'm sure all of us will agree to that. Communication and the effectiveness of communication has very little bearing from the other side, who is the receiver. There are three aspects of communication: the sender, the medium, and the receiver. The complete onus, more or less, particularly interpersonal relationship, lies with the sender to be effective, which is where in the previous postulation, as we saw, Maya and Sally, we were talking about how do we communicate it right with the right vocabulary, right? Since it's a competency model, social skills, it's about the leadership skill. It's about being able to stand in front. It's about being able to leading from the front. It's about taking the baton. Again, comes from the initiative, but that leadership capacity he talked about. Being the change catalyst. He talked about this whole, again, that's the Harvard's work, which I was talking about, when you can offset the resistance by, being positively dissatisfied with the things, valuing the change, and making that first step towards the change. So being that change catalyst, right? Having that perspective to say there needs to be a change in this process. And that's the aspect that he talks about. The conflict management, the capacity to deal with conflict. We did talk about briefly about the Thomas Killen tool out there. The conflict management by way of either getting into a compromise or just giving into the situation, or being judicious and finding a win-win. And this is where very often, the compromise is termed as win-win, which actually it is not. Most of you would agree with me. The compromise is very often, as part of the conflict management, is a lose-lose, not a win-win. Right? Win-win is only when both of us feel completely happy and satisfied that I could win what I wanted out of the relationship. That openness is there. If you have to bargain, as simple as this, if you go to a shop and you bargain a piece of cloth, and somebody gives you a number to it, and you say, no, give me for lesser, and you agree at some stage, do you come back completely satisfied? You feel, maybe I could have quoted a little lesser over there. So both sides lose. It's a lose-lose when you hit a compromise. Right? So conflict management, which he talks about, is a very critical aspect. Building bonds, building those connects, building those capacities to build those connects. Internal forums, external forums, relationships, which I can leverage, which relates to the political dynamics at times in the organization. That becomes very critical. How networked are you? How visible are you? How are you connected? And today, in this social media world, it becomes even more critical many a times. Okay, I'm not kind of a big evangelist for it, but I'm saying that's the reality of the world. Collaboration and cooperation goes without saying. It's a very critical competence to be able to collaborate and cooperate with people. And last is the team capabilities. So that's the framework. Team capabilities, again, as the word suggests, to be able to team up and work together. That's how the organizations are structured and designed today. None of the organizations, I think there are rarely organizations which don't structure themselves around teams, right? And teaming is basically the capacity to be able to leverage each other's competence. What I don't have, I can leverage from you. What you don't have, you can leverage from me. It's not about having the same set of skills as part of the team necessarily all of us having. Maybe on the functional side, yes, but on the other aspects, on the softer aspects, it's about facilitating each other, right? So that's the kind of framework, that's the kind of model that Baron had given. And basis this, this is the tool which has been created. It's called ESCI, Emotional and Social Competence Inventory. Primary work which has been picked up from Daniel Goleman, and subsequently in conjunction with Hay Group, Richard Boydes created or facilitated the development of this tool, right? It's a 360-degree tool. 360-degree tool in the sense, it's not just a self-rater, it's a multi-rater. For me, any of the people who are working around with me, above me, below me, sideways, peers, everybody responds to this questionnaire. It has 133 questions, takes about 45 minutes per person to complete. In a sense, if I'm filling up for myself or if I'm filling up for my colleague, Each of them would take about 45 minutes to complete it. It measures 5 emotional intelligence and 7 social intelligence factors. As I said, it's a a competency model rather than just the emotional intelligence model. So 5 EI factors and 7 social intelligence factors. And again, this is largely designed for the group which is above 18 years of age. They also have created a university edition to it, to which they have also added 2 cognitive intelligence factors. And all of this is online. ESCI is an online tool, a 360-degree tool. I mean, of course, again needs to be purchased. This again comes from today because Hey Group is part of now Korn Ferry. So Korn Ferry has the rights to sell this tool. So that's where you find this tool if you just in case interested to bring Daniel Goleman's tool, which has been created in conjunction by Richard Boyces and Hey Group. So that's a tool very briefly we talk about. So looking at the other models, the couple of more models which are remaining, I would quickly run you through. Baron, Ryu and Baron, one of the most significantly used emotional intelligence models and tools today, most standardized and most established method for testing emotional intelligence comes from a gentleman called Ryu and Baron. He created this tool in 1997. I had the fortune to be participating in this development of this tool. It's been called as a mixed model in the sense it addresses the competencies, the traits, and the skills. If you remember the competency iceberg, where the iceberg of Hay, McBurr, etc. But I don't want to bore you with that as a model. But essentially, the mixed model means over here it has aspects of competency, it has aspects of traits we have, and it also has aspects of skills or abilities. So Baron defines emotional intelligence is an non-cognitive capabilities, competencies, and skills that influence one's ability to succeed in coping with environmental demands and pressures. Talks about 5 aspects. Intrapersonal. Intrapersonal is something which is to do with my own capacity. Internal, dealing with myself, the skill to deal with myself. Interpersonal, which is dealing my relationships, the adaptability, the stress management, and the general mood scale. Okay, they have been further subdivided, very much on the same lines as other postulations. So intrapersonal is emotional self-awareness. We have spoken about it. Assertiveness. Now this is on the continuum of being, aggressive versus submissive. Somewhere in the middle, being assertive. How do we be assertive? Self-regard. Do I hold self-regard or do I have complexes? Do I look down upon myself? Briefly, we were talking about, and if you look up from the works of Eric Berne, where he talks about I'm okay, you are okay. So in any relationship, do I hold that self-regard? Do I feel I'm okay in that relationship? Or with regards to the world, with regards to people that I have around? The self-actualization. Now, self-actualization is a very big word. If you see, this comes essentially from the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where this is the 5th need after, the bread and butter need or the social security need and relationship need, etc., is the aspect of self-actualization, where it goes very similar to that achievement drive, somewhere that Daniel Goleman was talking about. That need to be feeling at some stage that I have achieved and arrived and done what I intended to. So self-actualized. And the independence. Am I capable to deal by myself? This is a very critical aspect in today's world, particularly when you experience, and we all have been witnessing this, and again, Professor Tripathi was talking about India becoming a suicide capital of the world in a way. I think that capacity to deal with emotions or the situations or the context and the realities with relative independence, that capacity in ourselves. And I think that's when it gets vulnerable. So if you actually put all these 5 into that context, you would find that emotional self-awareness, assertiveness, self-regard, self-actualization, and independence. If these go low, you have a recipe out there. I don't want to call it out, but that's something which creates either depressive or it can lead to any kind of unintended untoward situations. So that's the intrapersonal skill that he talks about, which is very critical. The second he talks about is the interpersonal skills. The interpersonal skills is the interpersonal relationships. How good, how comfortable, how inclined am I willing to make the relationships? In those relationships, my social responsibility. Do I create those relationships with a sense of social responsibility? These relationships can create cartels. These relationships can create, academic forums or the forums of global value. So behind those relationships, what is the intended? If you actually look at it, even Osama bin Laden would have created significant relationship across the globe. I mean, certainly maybe more than that, and Dr. Tripti is going to talk as part of the destructive emotion at this later stage, but that's how it is. He would have created a relationship where people were willing to die for him. But what was the sense of social responsibility? Maybe in his mind, that was the sense of social responsibility. And the empathy, the capacity to be able to sense, appreciate, and facilitate emotions in others. Those are the aspects of interpersonal skills that Baron talks about. Then he talks about the adaptability scale, which is where, as I said, it's a mixed model. So it's about problem solving. So the ease, it's not necessarily the cognitive capacity of problem solving, but what in some other postulations, if you actually look at 16 personality factors of Cartle, that's another methodology or tool where they talk about first and foremost over there is the aspect of intellectence, or my belief in my capacity or intelligence or the capacity to deal with the problem situation. So essentially what he's talking about problem solving over here is not necessarily the capacity to problem solve. It's about my belief in my capacity to problem solve. So that's the adaptability scale, and which creates this robustness or the capacity to be able to stand up into any of the situations and to take the responsibility and initiative. The second aspect he talks about, the reality testing. Yes, I can solve the problem, but can I jump out of the fourth floor? I mean, I need to have a real appreciation, even if there is a fire down there. Would I be necessarily, if somebody is drowning, right? Can I jump into the water if I don't know ABC of swimming? Even if he could have saved so those are the kind of situations. So I'm not saying necessarily somebody would jump or not, but there could be situations. So in those situations, to be able to make that reality test, how conducive, how available, and how competent am I in that situation to be able to aid or help, right? And that flexibility. Flexibility is, again, that openness to be able to assimilate and to learn more. One of the very interesting things, and I don't know if some of you would have heard this, one of these Mann Ki Baat from Narendra Modi is talking about one of the gentlemen down south in Tamil Nadu, who is 92 years old. He's still writing a book and he's writing it on the computer. When he grew up in a situation when there was nothing like computers, he learned computing or computers at the age of 86, the gentleman. I don't remember the name of him, but just about that flexibility, that openness, that eagerness to keep learning, eagerness to stay relevant. And mind you, in today's world, in current world, we were running a survey with some of the very senior leaders with this whole conversation around millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z, etc., etc. A lot of people at the very senior levels are starting to feel, are they continuing to be relevant? I think it's just about that flexibility, that capacity to move on, that capacity to be able to take up, and becomes part of the very critical aspect of the adaptability. And that the two other tools that they have, two other aspects or factors that Baron talks about is the stress management, which is the stress tolerance, and the impulse control. So how much of stress can I deal with? What is the level? What is that threshold? What is that margin? And within which, what is the level of control on my impulses? How reactive I'm likely to be, and that's the aspect. So he talks about the stress management as a scale, and the general mood scale, which is about happiness and optimism. How much of optimism and how much of happiness do I bring to the table? So these are the kind of tools that, or these are the kind of aspects that Ruben Baron brought into his model or the framework, which is a mixed model. And very quickly about them, Baron EQI, I worked on Baron EQI 1.0. This is the 2.0 now. It's 1.0 was about 184 questions. 2.0 consists of 133 items. It's a self-report measure, completely self-report. Self-report essentially means that I take the test for myself, right? There's also a 360-degree version to it, right? So same can be used in a 360-degree approach, where you can take response. You can respond to yourself, and you can take responses from everybody around you to assess you on your emotional quotient. So that's, and which is where, it really helps where you have both the things going together, which is where you do your self-evaluation and you get a 360-degree view on yourself. You are able to then see where is your appreciation about yourself converging against. So what is that halo, right? So it helps discover that halo. And this is something which is available to be run on people with 18 years in a work age. So, and both these tools, whether it is 2.0 or 360-degree, they give one total score on emotional intelligence, the final score. There are 5 factors. These are 5 factors that we are talking about, which is intrapersonal, interpersonal, adaptability, stress management, general mood scale. And then the 15 specific factors, these are the sub-factors that I've already discussed about. So that's the kind of outcome that you get on the Bar-On EQI. As I said, again, this tool comes from Multi Health Systems Incorporated in New York. And that's the one of the most widely used in the organizations today, if one was to think about. It also has a university version or a youth version, as they call it, right? For the people who are below the age of 17. So there's a youth version to it, which is something called university version somewhere else, right? So that's the Bar-On EQI. Very quickly, being conscious of time, I'm moving into the last one over there. Maybe we'll take another 10 minutes over there before we can get into a break. This is a model, not so prominent, not so visible, but from 2 people called Cooper and Sabaf, created in 1996. It's called a 4 cornerstone model. They essentially desisted from really getting into defining the emotional intelligence itself. Instead, they really got into creating a model out of that, right? The model actually focused on the fact that creative involvement in a stimulating job opportunity or an exciting discussion results in an increase in alertness, emotional energy, and performance. So they essentially have gone a little length extra in terms of shaping this model to aid innovation, to aid something which they have actually called emotional alchemy, which I'll come to. So they talked about 4 aspects: emotional literacy, which is very similar to what we have been experiencing in terms of emotional awareness, etc., etc. Emotional fitness, which is about that inner toughness, the capacity to deal with emotions. The emotional depth, so it's about that capacity to go deeper and deal with emotions in self and others. And the emotional alchemy is leveraging these emotions and channelizing these emotions in the direction of bringing about a positive change. Alchemy as a word, if all of you would recall, it comes from chemistry. In chemistry, it's about, when you trigger a mechanism or a chain reaction or a chemical reaction to convert lead into a gold. So when you change the form of metal from one to another. So that's the idea with which they have come up with this whole concept of emotional alchemy, because you didn't see this aspect so prominently coming across in any other models. A little difficult to deploy, but yes, it's a model of its actual worth. And there's a lot of further research which has been happening on this topic. And interestingly, Daniel Goleman's wife, this lady called Tara Bene has actually come up with a whole book on this aspect of emotional alchemy. If you would want to reach out for this book, it's called Emotional Alchemy by Tara Bene Goleman, right? So which is where a lot of trigger, a lot of movement in terms of where the emotional intelligence research is moving towards. I think in the responses that we received to one of the Google forms, some people were talking about what are the topics to kind of get deeper into with regards to research. I think this is one of the topics that some of you can actually pick up and leverage and work upon, in terms of the emotional intelligence in relationship to the creativity and innovation. Yeah. Coming to the specifics, emotional literacy, as it talks about, is about emotional honesty to start with. Somewhere we heard this earlier as well. This is about being very honest in recognition, in naming, in appreciating the emotions that we have. Emotional energy, looking at with positivity of not saying that emotions create negative energy. Yes, they might, if we don't be very conscious and mindful about it. And hence, to leverage is only possible when we recognize the energy that emotion creates in us. Emotional feedback, a very difficult process, both to receive and to give. Very often we think we are giving, but how open are we to receive this emotional feedback? Right? And that only can fix our language, that only can fix our vocabulary if we are open to this emotional feedback, as they talk about. And the practical intuition. This is a very interesting topic. You know, there's a corollary into this. It's about practical intuition. Intuition, which can be randomly creative, but how can you make a practical intuition about things? Practical is about something that we can be, you know, which can be applied. So bringing that aspect of practical intuition to the things into a situation is something that they talk about as part of emotional literacy. The emotional fitness then is authentic presence. Just being as I am, not feeling vulnerable, not feeling insecure, or presenting myself just the way that I am. A lot of people, you would experience that they have this, difficulty dealing with the fact that they might not be so good at English. That's not our mother tongue. That's not our native. Yes, they have been oriented into English, you know, by virtue of the history that we have in the past, and which creates a positive advantage for most Indians overseas. But then not having that comfort with the fact that I'm not good at English very often impacts the authentic presence of a lot of people. They can't come up with very, with so much of confidence, which we saw as a critical aspect in the previous one when we looked at Baron's perspective. The trust radius. The trust radius is about the capacity or the dynamics of trust that I create around myself. How much can I be trusted? Do people think that I can be trusted? So that's a trust radius. So it's around me, the whole radius that I create within which people feel safe of me. They feel comfortable to come to me. They feel really good to share with me and talk and deal with their own emotional challenges with me. So that's a trust radius. The third aspect is the constructive discontent. Remember, we have already spoken about the constructive discontent, a positive dissatisfaction. They talk about this in more potent manner. This is very, very critical, necessary, initial element to be able to facilitate change. Unless I have constructive discontent. If it is a destructive discontent, you know, that is quite possible. And very often you see this, which is where you find that there is a lot of conflict that arises because there's no course. Yesterday, Professor Tripathi was talking about this situation currently when it's a destructive or not so constructive discontent, maybe at the end of the farmers where they're saying, take it back or nothing less. That's certainly not in the constructive direction. Just as much the government might be adamant on the other side. So how do you look at from the constructive discontent to saying, yes, we are willing to resolve this situation. Let's find a middle ground. Let's find a meeting ground. So that's a constructive discontent. And resilience renewal. It will be tested over why the word resilience could have been sufficient. But they essentially talk about resilience renewal. What is this renewal? It gets tested over and over and over again. So how do you kind of bounce back? Right? So how do you refill that bottle of resilience for yourself in the situations? Hence the resilience renewal. You might be as resilient, but there could be situations at such an odd that it might fail you. So how do you kind of keep coming back and bouncing back with that resilience is the aspect of resilience renewal that they talk about. Coming to the emotional depth, unique potential and purpose, right? So unique potential and purpose is that belief, that appreciation, that understanding that everybody has a unique potential and to create a purpose out of it for myself and for everybody else around me. How do I create a purpose for growth? How do I create a purpose for looking forward? Being optimistic, right? Depending upon the potential, and we'll talk about this in mindfulness of self, particularly what is potential, and how that can be leveraged. We are going to talk about this, but that unique understanding and appreciation of that unique potential, and to create a purpose out of that for anybody and everybody, and for myself. The commitment, accountability, and conscience. The word speaks for itself. The commitment, the accountability, and conscience for that, positive change, the purpose, the responsibility, the social responsibility that we were talking about earlier. The applied integrity. The applied integrity. Why the word applied integrity? My inner anchor might say that it is not right. The ethics and morality we are going to talk about. But the applied integrity, at times, as much I would say that bribing is bad, but when I get stuck on the traffic, or somewhere the traffic police stops me for some reason, will I be giving into that? So the applied integrity, they're particularly talking about, and which is there has to be a continuity, there is a demonstration of it on a continuous basis, which is about the applied integrity. Because a lot of times I might be vulnerable in those situations to, just to kind of let go of it and move on. That's reason why they have particularly talked about the apply integrity as part of it, and not integrity by itself. By nature, human might be integral, but how does it deploy down the line is where it fades at times. Getting overly practical or pragmatic about things at times it takes away the applied integrity over there. Influence without authority. Very often, and we are all positionally in a seat of authority. But how do I play my authority or gain that authority, which actually in the leadership frameworks has been referred to as that charisma, influence without authority? What was something which was bringing people to connect with Gandhi at some stage, right? Or for that matter, any of those leaders, right? The influence without authority. And yesterday, we talked about a situation in the US at the moment, certainly which is coming triggered out of the position of authority. Certainly, it's not so much with that influence without authority out there, right? So that's the aspect of emotional authority or influence without authority. And last, and the critical part over here is the emotional alchemy, as I was talking about. It's the intuitive flow. It's the inner drive to be spontaneous. It's childlike, right? If you look at Eric Berg's framework, this is the more child in ourselves. So what is that intuitive flow that we are bringing to the table? The second aspect he talks about is the reflective time shifting. Now, what is this reflective time shifting? The word seems a little complicated, but it's just about, thinking through and managing my time. Time shifting in the sense, can I do this a little later? So priority, urgency of importance matrix. So how do I create, that's something, what is more important, what is more urgent? And how do I reflectively create that time shifting in my scheme of things? So how do I manage that? So that I'm not stressed. Today, most people, when you talk about the reason of stress at work, is about time management, and which is something that they have recognized important over here. Opportunity sensing. It's about seeing where the opportunity lies, right? What can be something new? How to create a positive nudge in a radically new direction? Which is, as I said, one of the things that we are going to talk about is destructive emotions. That's something as an opportunity. That's being led, the research on that topic is being led by none other than His Highness Dalai Lama. So what is that opportunity sensing? And of course, those are researchers who would have sensed this opportunity and creating the future. It's about creating the future as it might look like. That capacity to be able to envision, that capacity to be able to create a big picture from a future's perspective, and to channelize the emotions for this, for the better utilization of this intuitive flow, to better time management, to better opportunity sensing, and to be able to create that capacity is something that's an add-on value, and which is necessarily the reason why I thought it would be important to introduce you to this model of Cooper and Savard, particularly. They have created a tool, but for some reason it has not been recognized. They have created a tool which is quite standardized, but it's a little cumbersome tool and a very difficult method to kind of arrive at the final output. little too complicated is why it has not been in so prominent use. It's available very easily in a book. If you would want to go, Emotional Intelligence at Work, which has been written by Cooper and Tawaf. Again, a publication of sometime around 96, 97. And you have the tool in that, but it's a very comprehensive, yet a little cumbersome tool, which is where somehow it has not gained so much of acceptance into the organizational space very often. So that's something that comes with them. So to end with it, some of the things I would leave you with is the points to ponder is cognitive intelligence contributes to 20% of the success. Then what constitutes the rest? That's a big question, and it has always remained a trigger for most researchers to say, what is the remaining? Where does that 80% of success come from? Social and emotional intelligence learning is different from cognitive and technical learning. You can't easily run or do a 3-day or a 5-day program, and hence it requires a very different approach to training and development, which is where, as I said yesterday, we intend to make it as facilitative and workshop kind, but for the constraints of the virtual mode. Had it been in personal mode, I think it would have been a very different experience that would have intended to bring you. And lastly, emotional intelligence can be developed at any age for any person. There are people you would have experienced in your careers and journeys. Say, for example, a very strict, very tough, police officer at the senior most level. They would have been behaving, in a very, very, very different, very authoritative, very aggressive, very, very, high-handed manner through their careers. But the superannuation or the retirement makes such annihilatory changes in people that at that stage, you see a very transitioned, very different person from what the person might have been to what the person is. Classic example, J.S. Ribeiro, Gill, M.S. Gill, the kind of people they were to the kind of people that they became. So hence, emotional intelligence is contingent upon when we reflect, when we think, and the kind of experiences that we undergo, it can develop and change at any point of time. It's never too late with regards to emotional intelligence to build upon. Right. So with that, and I stop over here very quickly. I think let's have a few questions if you have over there, particularly with regards to this session. If you have any questions, maybe by raise of hands.
Oh. Rahul, I would request you to unmute all the participants. We can avoid the camera because that will be giving us some lag. But yes, of course, audio we can work out.
Yeah, good morning. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah, thank you for this excellent session. My name is Surya Kumar. So when you're talking about emotional facilitation of thinking, in one of the points you said, emotional mood swings change individuals' perception from optimistic to pessimistic.
Yeah.
So my understanding is it is the perspective which brings the emotional swings, isn't it? Thinking causes emotion or emotion causes thinking?
Okay. It's a very interesting question. Though it seems like first came the egg or the chicken, Surya Kumarji, thanks for your question. But I would call it's about how we, and that's exactly the postulation over here. It's about saying, how do we recognize the situation? Yes, situations trigger emotions in us. Yes, situations create mood swings. But it's completely dependent upon my appreciation, that 10 seconds, right? In that, the appreciation, the capacity to make use of the emotion, the orientation to make best benefit out of the emotion. I think that's something which is very critical, which can change. So, that can help me to maintain my motivation, that can help me to maintain my positive or optimism, as you talked about, in the situation. If I have my sight on the larger purpose. Hello.
Professor Indra Shah, yeah. Please continue.
Yeah. So it's completely dependent upon our appreciation and observation and experience of the situation, and which is very individual. And that would trigger. So hence, the emotion, yes, they're triggered by the situations, but it also depends upon, and which is where it's called emotional intelligence, right? The intelligence aspect to it is particularly this whole aspect of appreciating, analyzing the emotion. I hope that answers your question.
Good morning, Professor Kumar. This is Dr. Deepa from Coimbatore. It was a very informative session. If you want to practice or if you want to become a trainer in emotional intelligence, which model do you think we should be following? The ability, the mixed or Baron, or which would be more appropriate if we want to take it to the corporate or to the executives in the training model? What is your take on that?
So honestly, I think it's not either or, I would call it. There are training institutions. The consortium itself runs the training programs. Consortium for research on emotional intelligence in organizations, as I told about. They themselves run the training programs. There are several in the organizations in India which might run their program. It's largely dependent upon as to where you find your space and which is where. I think it's a very vast subject today. Honestly, if you ask me, 20 years back when I got into doing PhD on this or research on this, I had very little to go back to in terms of the history and the research and the available resource. But today there is much. So honestly, there's not one. It's basically where you find a deeper connect with. Some people are finding deeper connect still with the Meyer-Salovey approach because, as I said, it's a 16-stage model. It becomes a little more, granular in terms of how do you aid emotional intelligence as a facilitator or as a trainer. While some others might find, get Daniel Goleman's because that's the most popular model. A lot of people might want to go with that. And there are more simplified versions of it, very honestly. And which is one that you would experience in the next session. So there is a more simplified version to it. So it purely depends upon your driver in terms of what are the aspects. Cooper and Sawaf again available over there, except for the fact, and it talks about creativity. So if you are inclined to take people into that journey, then it's going to be your call on that. So I don't think either or is good, but it's just that what fits well with your own emotional orientation. I think that's going to be the answer to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hello, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. It was a nice session, great learning. I have one question, sir. If when we do criticize to a particular person, they go through a particular phases of stress, and that particular stress creates the emotional disbalance.
Right.
So in that case, when we, as a leader, when there is a number of followers, deliberately some leaders also do such kind of activity to make them disbalance. Some leaders do some kind of activity. Then how that is going to impact it when I'm working into an organization, when such thing happens, being an employee, how to cope up with that?
See, it's a difficult question in every day. I think all of us experience that. But the fact is, we have to start to understand and, why does somebody play the manner that the individual plays? It's just about getting into deeper appreciation, deeper analysis of that. If somebody is overly caustic, overly critical, and that impacts the emotions of everybody else, I think it's very important to understand what's triggered. A lot of times the trigger might be insecurity. A lot of times trigger might be incapacity to be able to lead. A lot of times, so appreciating that. And I think it's, how do you kind of then, firstly, create that toughness in oneself, that is yourself, in terms of saying, that person is going to behave in this manner. So should you allow yourself to get bothered about that? Is first question to ask. And the second is, then, so which is where managing your emotions is going to be the first aspect in that, understanding and managing your emotions. You know very well that it is because of a certain person that these emotions are getting created, the manner in which they are getting created. So should you be getting affected? Is a big question to ask. And the second is, in due course, if there is a method, can there be a feedback brought to the individual? Can there be a method to help the individual to overcome or his or her insecurities because of which somebody might be behaving that manner? Maybe not in our capacity at times, but certainly it's in our capacity not to feel affected by that. When you know that that person is going to be caustic and critique just the manner that you experience the person, then you can just let it pass. A lot of times, emotional resilience is also about what that judgment of saying what I need to get to stick on me and what I need to let go and let it pass on me. So I think that's going to be a very critical aspect in that. It does affect the morale, no doubt, but I think that's going to be very critical. If you can buffer it, if you can deal it at your level, then you will be able to, aid and facilitate for people to be able to deal below yourself.
Right. Sir, at that particular moment, I believe so that cognitive intelligence will be more role to play. It was more important role to play in that case.
See, as simple as this, the two aspects of intelligence, whether it's cognitive or emotional, they are not either or. And yesterday we were talking about, can our mind work at times and not heart? And can our heart work at times and not mind? No, it doesn't happen. So yes, it's a continuous, and which is where you're still calling it as emotional intelligence.
Right.
Right. So hence that calibration happens completely and all the time between your heart and mind. And if the calibration, you guide it in an appropriate direction, you will be able to you will be in a better position to make a judgment and to be able to deal with and work with it.
Right. So actually, being a professor, when I teach the students to deal with the situation, when they go into the job and they face this kind of situation and they come back and that says that I want to leave the job, I'm not able to tolerate it, is too much. So such scenario is bothers that if situation happens, you need to learn it, and it cannot happen in a day. It takes time, and with experience you will learn the things. You will be cooled down, because when you are young, your blood is something little bit different, and when you are becoming older, your thought process and learning is something different. So you'll start tolerating the things. So when the toleration comes, the learning becomes more better. You're able to start you will be learning about that particular thing.
Yes.
That's the very important part.
Each of the experience or the events of life are building blocks. We keep learning. We draw the learning as we desire to. Right? We choose to draw the learning.
Excellent.
And that's everybody's life.
Right, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Nice.
Any more questions? Maybe one or two more questions, and then we take a break, if there's any. I see two more hands.
Sir, am I audible, sir? This is Alok Mishra.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a query regarding the percentage of success the emotional intelligence contributes toward the success, sir.
Sorry, I couldn't get you very clearly. So can you come again?
Sir, what is the percentage of success that emotional intelligence adds to the success?
Okay. So a question which every researcher still continues to deal with or grapple with, is about that 20%, maximum up to 20% is the cognitive intelligence. Then what is the rest? I won't say remaining 80% is all emotional intelligence. There are other intelligence, the social intelligence, the emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and so many others, right? So I think it's very difficult to pinpoint and say what percentage, but certainly it's significant. I can only say this. There's no study or research which can very sharply and very objectively establish that what is the percentage there.
And sir, what about, sir, this development, how it is to be improved? That I'm more concerned about the training and other things.
See, training efficiency is at best in terms of retention. There's all the researchers which suggest it's up to 10%, right, from a training program. So it's a little more experiential and driven from inside. If you decide, as I said, if you carry that positive discontent, with regards to something about yourself. You want to bring about that change. Unless you have that and you make that initiative, unless you move in that direction, unless you are conscious and mindful of it, it can be aided by somebody who is a coach, who could be a facilitator or anybody, right? But certainly not as part of the training session. It can't happen in a 3-day, 5-day, even if it is a 15-day training program. Something as simple as this, that, emotional intelligence or such subtle topics, you can only bring the people to the resource. But whether they digest, they take in the resource, it's completely at personal behest and personal initiative. And I think that's going to be a major driver. And as I said, it requires a very different approach completely. It's not something that you can give to somebody. It's somebody, if is willing to take, will be able to take it.
Good morning, sir. My voice is audible?
Yes.
Okay, sir. This is Dr. Dharmendra Kumar Gangeshwar from BIT Durg, Chhattisgarh.
Yes, doctor.
Sir, my question is that, could you please throw the light on the relationship of professor and student in terms of intelligence, emotional intelligence?
Relationship between?
Professors and students.
Sorry, I couldn't get you.
Sir, could you please throw the light on the relationship of professor and students in the academic environment?
Okay, professor and students.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Professor and students. I think that's one of the most critical relationships. One of the most critical relationships, I would call it, in terms of, because a professor causes the imprint at a stage when the mind is most open. At the earlier stages of the journey, when the students are in the school or in the college. When I say school, I'm talking about management schools or engineering schools, etc. Don't get me wrong. Early stages as well. But these are very formative years. It completely depends upon, and hence a professor to student relationship, which is where, if you remember, I think most students, most of your alumnus, when they go out, they connect with certain professors so terrifically. Why so? Right? It's no other answer. It's not the cognitive capacity of the professor. There might be best of professors that you might have in the campus, but students connect with those who would have touched them differently, who would have, yes, who would have caused that emotional impact on them. Let's be very clear. And this takes me back to the previous question in terms of how much impact. I think if 20 years later a student comes back to you, doctor, he comes not because you are the best person in your subject. He comes because he treats you as the best person in the world who has been able to add value to him. And that comes from the aspect of emotional intelligence and nowhere else.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Very excellent lights you given. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, can we call it? I see it's kind of getting 12 o'clock. Can we call it now as a session and take a short break over there?